They thought the Turner family died in the fire that swallowed their home on that terrible night in 1900. They thought the flames had consumed every breath, every heartbeat, every whisper left inside those burning walls. But fate had other plans. Beneath the collapsing wooden floors, hidden in the dark belly of the cellar, a desperate father fought the fire with nothing but his shaking hands and jugs of apple cider. And when the flames finally died and the raiders walked away, believing their crime complete, the Turners rose from the ashes, only to face a nightmare far worse than the fire itself. What followed was a journey through grief, bondage, betrayal, and impossible survival. A father and his two remaining children would cross rivers, storms, chains, and death itself in search of a sunrise they were never supposed to see. This is their story. This is the summoning of dawn. The night the sky turned to fire began like any other in the Turner household. The wind whispered softly through the tall grass outside, brushing against the wooden walls of the small farmhouse as if tucking it gently into sleep. John Turner had finished his evening chores hours earlier, wiping the tiredness from his face with a damp cloth before kissing his wife, Mary, good night. Their 5 children slept nearby, curled beneath patched quilts that Mary had sewn over the years. Life was hard, but it was theirs, and that alone made it precious. Outside, the cicadas hummed. Inside, all was still. But sometime past midnight, the stillness cracked. A faint thud shook the front porch. Then another. John opened his eyes slowly, confused at first, thinking it might be one of the cows leaning against the fence. But the next sound was unmistakably human, a heavy boot scraping across wood, followed by low whispers carried by the wind. His breath stopped in his chest. He sat up, listening. The whispers grew louder, more hurried, more deliberate. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal striking metal as someone tested the lock. John's heart pounded, sending cold dread through his limbs. He reached for his trousers and slid silently from the bed, motioning Mary to stay quiet. She sat up with wide eyes, instinct already telling her what his trembling fingers did not need to say. He crouched to the window, lifting the curtain just a sliver. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. Silhouettes, 6, maybe 7, moved across the yard. They carried rifles and torches. Their shadows stretched like jagged monsters across the ground. These were not simple thieves. These were raiders. He had heard rumors of them in recent months. Groups of armed men who roamed the countryside at night, breaking into homes, stealing livestock, burning everything behind them, and leaving no witness alive. Until now, the Turners had thought themselves too remote, too small, too humble to attract such danger. He had been wrong. John rushed to Mary, gripping her shoulders with urgency. "Wake the children," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Quietly. We're going to the cellar." Mary didn't ask questions. She moved swiftly from bed to bed, gently shaking the children awake, her hands trembling but steady enough to mask her terror. Little Anna rubbed her eyes sleepily. Nathan sat up instantly, sensing something was wrong. The twins clung to each other, barely breathing. The first crash came then, the unmistakable slam of a shoulder hitting the front door. The entire house shuddered. "Go," John said sharply, ushering them toward the cellar door concealed under a loose kitchen rug. He pulled it open with a grunt, revealing the narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. "Down. Quickly. No noise." Mary ushered the children down one by one, whispering prayers under her breath. John waited until the last small pair of feet disappeared into the shadows before he followed and closed the hatch behind him, sliding the iron latch into place. The moment it clicked shut, another crash echoed above, louder this time, stronger, followed by a man shouting orders. Inside the cellar, the air felt thick, heavy with fear. The single lantern flickered as Mary lit it, casting shaky shadows over crates, barrels, and shelves lined with old tools. The children huddled together, whispering in small whimpers, but John gestured for silence. Above them, the front door splintered with a deafening crack. Boots thundered into the house. Furniture scraped violently across the floor. Glass shattered. Heavy footsteps crossed overhead, fast, purposeful, searching. The raiders' voices blended into a harsh stream of commands and curses. John could feel the vibrations of each footstep through the wooden beams. He closed his eyes, silently begging that they wouldn't find the hatch. But the raiders seemed to know the house well. One of them paced above the kitchen, muttering something before slamming a rifle butt against the floor, listening for hollow spaces. John's breath caught. The next blow struck closer. Another. And another. The twins began to cry, soft, trembling sobs they couldn't hold in. Mary covered their mouths gently, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The raiders shouted again. Then something scraped across the kitchen floor. Boots, repositioning. A torch being lifted. A plan forming. John understood before he heard the words. Burn it, one of the voices barked. Burn it to the ground. Mary gasped. John reached instinctively for her hand, squeezing it hard. Above them, the raiders spread through the house, smashing more windows, pouring something, kerosene, maybe, across the wooden floors. The sharp smell seeped into the cellar through the cracks. Then came the strike of a match. A second later, the house roared to life. Flames erupted overhead, devouring the walls with terrifying hunger. The heat became instant, rising through the floorboards like a living creature clawing downward. The cellar filled with smoke, thin at first, then thicker, choking. The children began coughing. John looked wildly around the cellar for anything that could keep them alive. His eyes darted across shelves, barrels, tools, then landed on a row of large glass jugs stacked along the wall. Apple cider. Dozens of them. He grabbed one, yanked the cork out with his teeth, and hurled the liquid upward along the glowing floorboards. It hissed violently, steam exploding back into his face. The children shrank back in fright. Help me, John shouted hoarsely, handing jugs to Nathan and the older of the twins. Pour it where the heat is strongest. Keep the wood wet. Mary joined him without hesitation, soaking cloth sacks and slamming them against the scorching boards overhead. The flames raged above, crackling, snapping, seeking any weakness, but each time they tried to break through, the Turners fought back with liquid fire breaks. For minutes that felt like hours, they battled the inferno. The cellar filled with stifling heat. Their lungs burned. Their eyes watered. Steam coated the walls like sweat. Then, slowly, the roaring above softened. Cracks replaced by dull groans. Flames collapsing rather than advancing. Finally, silence. Not the peaceful silence of night, but the heavy silence that follows destruction. John fell to his knees, exhausted, his hands blistered and raw. Mary pressed a wet cloth to Anna's forehead. The children leaned against each other, trembling but alive. Above them, the raiders' voices echoed once more, calmer now. A few footsteps. A brief laugh. The scrape of boots moving away. They're gone, Mary whispered, barely believing her own words. John waited several minutes before he dared to unlatch the hatch. The charred wood creaked as he pushed it open. Smoke drifted past him in slow, gray ribbons. The house, or what remained of it, was now little more than a skeleton of blackened beams. The roof had collapsed inward. The walls stood only in fragments. Everything they owned was ash, but they were still breathing. John helped each child up into the ruins. The cold morning air stung their lungs after the suffocating cellar. The first light of dawn shimmered faintly along the horizon. And then, a sound. A shrill, startled scream. John snapped his head toward the orchard. There, perched high in a pear tree, clutching half-eaten fruit in his hands, was a young boy, one of the raiders' children. He stared at the Turners with wide, shocked eyes. You're alive," he yelled in disbelief. The scream echoed across the yard like a warning siren. John's blood ran cold. Voices answered from the distance. The raiders had not gone far. John grabbed Mary's arm. Run. But she had no time to take even a single step before a rifle cracked from the shadows. Mary fell. The world seemed to slow to a crawl as her body collapsed onto the scorched earth, her hand still reaching for John, her eyes still holding the last flicker of hope. No, John screamed, but another shot ripped through the air, and he had no choice. He scooped Anna and the youngest twin into his arms, shouting for Nathan to follow. The raiders charged from the trees. John ran. He ran through the smoke, through the ruins of his home, through the orchard where pears lay scattered like dropped lanterns. Bullets tore past him. The twins screamed. Nathan stumbled behind him, sobbing but determined. They raced toward the river, the only direction left. Behind them, the raiders kept coming. Ahead, the river roared. John didn't think. He dove into the water, pulling the children with him, letting the icy current swallow them whole. The last thing he saw before the river dragged them away was the burning outline of the only life he had ever known, and the dark figures standing over it. He did not know where the river would take them, only that it had taken everything else. And thus began the long, brutal journey that would lead them into darkness, chains, storms, and finally, into the fragile hope of a dawn they had not yet earned. A dawn they were not meant to see. A dawn they would fight for. A dawn they would one day reach. Cold, violent water pulled at John Turner and his children as if trying to drag them into the depths and erase them from the world forever. The current slammed against John's chest with a force that stole his breath, spinning him sideways, then throwing him backward as he fought to keep the children above the surface. The roar of the water drowned out the gunshots behind them, turning the world into a chaotic blur of churning waves and desperate gasps. Anna clung to his neck, coughing, her fingers digging into his skin. The younger twin, Caleb, sputtered and cried in broken bursts as John braced him with his free arm. Upstream, Nathan tried to swim on his own, but the river tossed him like a leaf, pulling him under before spitting him back out. "Hold on," John shouted, though he wasn't sure if the children could hear him through the thunder of the current. "Don't let go? Don't let." A wave crashed over his head, filling his mouth with icy water and cutting his voice short. He choked, kicking desperately until his head broke the surface again. Every muscle in his body screamed. The cold was a knife. His limbs felt heavy, sluggish. He had survived the fire only to drown beneath a sky now turning gray with morning. He forced his legs to move. Stroke. Breathe. Kick. Hold the children. Don't die. He repeated the rhythm in his mind, a chant against panic, a fragile thread keeping him connected to life as the river hurled them through its serpentine path. Branches whipped past them. Rocks grazed their legs. The world shrank to water and struggle and water. Then, through the roar, he heard Nathan scream. "Pa! I can't." John twisted, his heart seizing. Nathan had drifted several yards behind, his arms moving wildly, his head bobbing in and out of the water. Every time he sank, he came up weaker. "Swim to me," John shouted. "Nathan, swim." "I'm trying." "Pa." His voice vanished beneath a crashing wave. John's lungs burned with terror. He looked at the two little ones clinging to him, one on each side, then back at his older son. He couldn't swim to Nathan with both children in his arms. But he couldn't let Nathan drown. His mind raced, chaotic and sharp. "Caleb," he shouted over the noise. "Hold on to my shirt. Don't let go, no matter what." He shifted his grip, lifting the boy's small hands and forcing them to clutch the soaked fabric. "Anna," he gasped, pulling her close. "Wrap your arms around my neck. Tighter. Don't let go. Don't let go of me." She obeyed, choking on tears that mixed with the river water streaming down her face. Then John kicked hard, freeing one arm, and lunged toward Nathan. The distance felt impossible. Every stroke cost him breath. Every second, he lost strength. But slowly, painfully, he cut through the violent water and reached his son just as Nathan's head slipped below the surface again. John grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. Nathan came up coughing, eyes wide with terror. "Pa, I thought Eve got you," John said through clenched teeth. "Eve got you, son." But the river wasn't finished with them. A sharp bend appeared ahead, and the current accelerated, dragging them faster, harder, until the world felt like it was tilting. John saw rocks jutting from the water, black shapes like jagged teeth. He turned the children away from them and twisted his own body so he would take the impact. The first strike hit his ribs, sending a stab of pain down his side. The second slammed into his hip. His breath left him in a raw cry. But he held the children tight, even as stars flickered in his vision. The river carried them onward, the worst of the rocks behind them, but John felt himself weakening with each passing moment. The cold had seeped into his bones. His arms trembled violently. His legs felt numb. He didn't know how much longer he could stay afloat. Ahead, the river widened, the current slowing enough for the surface to smooth. The water shifted from roaring chaos to a strong, steady flow. John kicked toward the right bank, praying that the ground would rise soon, that somewhere, anywhere, There would be a shoreline they could reach before the river took its toll. Minutes passed in agonizing slowness. Then, at last, the current pushed them near a cluster of low branches drooping over the water. John reached out, grabbed one, missed. Reached again. His fingers slipped once more. His vision blurred at the edges. He tried a third time, summoning the last strength in his body, and his hand closed around a thick branch. He locked his grip around it with desperate force. "Hold on," he rasped to the children. "We're almost there." With trembling arms, he pulled the children closer to the branch. Nathan grabbed hold first, Caleb next, then Anna, sobbing but still clinging to his neck. John braced his feet against a submerged stone and hauled himself closer, inch by inch, until he could push the children up onto the muddy bank. Nathan crawled onto the grass, panting. Anna rolled onto her side, coughing hard. Caleb lay on his stomach, trembling uncontrollably. John tried to climb out behind them, but as soon as his hands left the branch, his strength collapsed. He slipped backward, the current tugging at him again. "Pa!" Nathan cried, scrambling toward him. John grabbed the branch again, but his numb fingers barely responded. The world spun. His breath hitched. A dark haze crept into the edges of his vision. Don't come into the water," he croaked. "Stay on the bank." Nathan hesitated, his eyes filled with terror. "Pa, please, stay there." John barked with the last scrap of authority he had. "I'm coming." He pulled himself up inch by inch, his muscles trembling violently, the cold threatening to steal his consciousness entirely. The children huddled above him, calling his name again and again, their voices thin with fear. Finally, with a final burst of effort he didn't know he had, John dragged himself onto the bank and collapsed beside the children, chest heaving, vision swimming. For several long moments, none of them moved. The river rushed beside them, indifferent, relentless, a force that had nearly claimed all their lives. The sky above glowed with the first pale streaks of dawn, casting a thin silver light across the wet grass. John lay on his back, staring at the sky, trying to breathe through the fire in his chest and the ice in his blood. They had escaped the flames. They had escaped the bullets. They had survived the river. But dawn brought no comfort, because now they were alone in the wilderness, miles from home, exhausted, soaked, freezing, and hunted. John pushed himself up slowly, his joints aching as if they had aged years in a single night. He looked at the children. They were shivering uncontrollably, their clothes dripping, their lips turning blue. "We have to move," he said softly. "If we stay here, we won't make it." Nathan helped the younger ones stand. Anna leaned heavily against John, her small body trembling. Caleb wiped his nose with the back of his hand, saying nothing. They began walking along the riverbank, their feet sinking into wet earth, their breaths coming out in misty clouds. The forest around them felt vast and silent, the air thick with morning chill. Birds stirred in the branches overhead, their calls echoing through the trees with an eerie calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos the family had just escaped. As they moved deeper into the woods, John's mind raced. He didn't know how far the raiders had followed. He didn't know if they were still alive, still searching, still carrying torches and rifles. He didn't know if anyone would help them, or if the next person they stumbled upon would turn them away or turn them in. His only certainty was that they had to keep moving. Hours passed in painful silence. The children grew slower, their steps dragging. John's ribs throbbed with every breath, swelling from where the river rocks had struck him. His hands were raw and bleeding. His clothes hung heavy on his body, refusing to dry in the cold morning air. At last, when the sun rose fully and warm light finally touched the trees, they stumbled upon a narrow dirt path cutting through the forest. John paused, scanning it carefully. It was used. Faint tracks pressed into the earth made that clear, but by whom, he could not tell. Nathan looked up at him, eyes pleading. "Pa, can we rest? Just for a little?" John hesitated. The father in him wanted to say yes. The survivor in him wanted to keep moving. But the children were stumbling. Anna's knees buckled twice in the last half hour. Caleb's steps were barely more than drags. Even Nathan looked ready to collapse. John nodded finally. "Just a little," he said. "Stay close. Don't wander." They sat beside the path, huddling together for warmth. John kept his eyes on the woods, listening for every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, every distant sound that might signal danger. The forest was calm for now, but his instincts churned with unease. After several minutes, Caleb tugged at his sleeve. "Pa," he whispered. "I hear something." John tensed. He listened carefully. Footsteps. Soft, steady, approaching along the path from the west. He motioned for the children to stay silent. His heart hammered painfully in his chest, fear and exhaustion twisting together. A figure emerged from the trees. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn suspenders and a sweat-stained shirt. His skin was dark, his expression unreadable. He froze when he saw them, a soaked, battered father and 3 shaking children, his eyes narrowing with both suspicion and concern. For a moment, no one moved. Then the man spoke, his voice low, steady. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Not in your condition. Not today." John swallowed hard. He didn't know if this man was safety or the beginning of another nightmare. And as the forest held its breath around them, the long road toward captivity and trust, suffering and survival, was about to begin. The stranger stood still on the path, sunlight slipping through the branches and tracing faint gold along his shoulders. John Turner felt the children press against him, trembling with exhaustion and fear, their eyes fixed on the tall man whose expression was impossible to read. The forest seemed to tighten around them, holding its breath. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the man stepped forward slowly, hands raised to show he carried no weapon. His voice came steady and calm, rough at the edges but not unkind. "You're hurt," he said. "All of you." John swallowed, his throat thick and raw from the river. "We had trouble," he managed, keeping his body between the stranger and the children. "I can see that." The man studied them carefully, his gaze settling on the bruises along John's ribs, the shivering children, the soaked clothes clinging to their thin frames. "There's a settlement about 2 miles that way," he said, nodding down the path. "You won't make it in your state." John tensed. "Are you offering help?" The man looked at him with a seriousness that felt heavy. "I'm offering a choice." Before John could respond, another voice echoed from deeper in the trees. "Elias? You found something?" 2 more figures stepped out from the brush, a woman and an older man. Both carried narrow bundles slung across their backs, the sort travelers and workers often carried. Their faces, too, were dark and weathered, their eyes alert but cautious. The woman looked at the Turners and gasped softly. "Good Lord, what happened to those children?" "Raiders," Elias said calmly. "Same group that burned the Carter place last month, I'll wager." The older man spat into the dirt. "Devils." John stiffened. "If you know those men, then you know we can't stay here long." "We do," Elias said. "And that's why I'm telling you to come with us. You need shelter before they come tracking along the river." Nathan shifted forward slightly, his voice small but firm. "Can we trust you?" Every adult in the clearing paused at the question. Elias' eyes softened. "Boy, if we meant you harm, we wouldn't be talking now." John hesitated, torn between fear and hope. His instincts, sharpened by the night's horrors, screamed caution. But the children were shaking with cold, their skin pale, their lips blue. He could feel their weakness in the way they leaned against him. They needed warmth. They needed food. They needed rest. He nodded once. "Lead the way." The group moved quickly through the forest, following a narrow path that wove between towering pines and moss-covered stones. The children walked in silence, leaning on John or holding each other's hands. Anna stumbled every few steps. Caleb kept wiping his nose with the sleeve of his torn shirt. Nathan, though trembling, stayed alert beside his father, glancing often at the strangers ahead. Elias slowed his pace so they could keep up. "You got a name, friend?" he asked. "John Turner." "And the little ones?" "Anna, Caleb, and Nathan." Elias nodded thoughtfully, as if committing their names to memory. "They're strong," he said. "Most children wouldn't have made it out of a river like that." John managed a tired smile. They didn't have much choice. The settlement, when they reached it, was not a town but a cluster of worn cabins hidden deep inside the woods, almost invisible until the trees parted to reveal them. Smoke curled from chimneys. Chickens scratched at the ground near a small garden plot. The air smelled faintly of cornmeal and wood smoke, warm, familiar scents that tugged painfully at John's heart. The woman who had walked with them, Ruth, hurried ahead, and pushed open the door of one of the cabins. "Bring them inside," she said. "They're freezing." Inside, the cabin was small but warm. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, filling the room with golden light. A table stood in the center, surrounded by simple wooden chairs. Thick quilts hung on hooks near the wall. Ruth ushered the children toward the hearth. She wrapped warm blankets around them, her motions quick but gentle, her eyes filled with concern. "They need food," she said, turning to Elias. "And rest. Lots of rest." Elias nodded. "They'll get something started." John stood uncertainly near the door, unsure whether he should sit, move, or leave. He felt out of place in the small, warm room, a ghost drifting through a life that had ended less than a day earlier. The older man, Heron, closed the door firmly, shutting out the cold. "You're safe here for now," he said. "The raiders don't come this way." "For now," John repeated quietly. Heron studied him, then sighed. "You've had a night no man should ever live through. Sit. Get warm. We'll talk soon enough." John lowered himself into a chair, wincing as the bruises along his side flared with pain. Nathan sat beside him. The younger children dozed near the fire, wrapped in blankets that nearly swallowed their small bodies. For several minutes, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the soft rustle of blankets. The warmth seeped into John's frozen limbs, easing the ache but not the weight in his chest. When Elias returned with a pot of warm corn soup, the children stirred. He handed bowls to each of them, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat slow," he warned. "After a night like that, your stomach will turn if you rush." Anna whispered a faint thank you before sipping the warm broth. Caleb leaned into the bowl as if it were a lifeline. Nathan ate quietly, his hands still shaking. John watched them with a mix of relief and sorrow. They were alive. But everything else, Mary, the house, the other children, was gone. Ruth noticed the look in his eyes. "You don't need to talk about it yet," she said softly. "Rest first." But John shook his head. "If I don't speak now, I'll lose my courage." They gathered around the table, the fire casting long shadows across the room. John told the story in a low, steady voice. The whispers outside the house, the break-in, the fire, the desperate battle in the cellar, the moment Mary fell, the bullets, the river. Ruth covered her mouth. Heron clenched his fists. Elias stood in silence, listening with grim intensity. When John finished, silence settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Finally, Elias spoke. "You said the men who attacked you were raiders." "Yes." Elias exchanged a look with Heron. It was the kind of look that carried its own language, unspoken, deep, familiar. "They've been moving east," Heron said. "Burning, taking, killing. That boy in the tree, he wasn't the first child they've dragged along." "Do you know who leads them?" John asked. "Not by name," Elias said. "But there's talk. Men surviving other attacks have said the same thing. They don't just steal. They don't just burn. They take people." "Take them?" Nathan whispered. Ruth nodded grimly. "Men for labor. Women for other things. Children too young to fight get forced to serve." John's stomach twisted. He looked at his children, all huddled near the fire, unaware of the full meaning behind the adults' quiet voices. Heron cleared his throat. "You'll need to decide what you want to do next." John exhaled slowly. "I want to get my children somewhere safe. Somewhere those men can't find us." "Then you can't stay here," Elias said. "Not long, at least. This settlement isn't on any map, but raiders have a way of finding what they're looking for." "Are you turning us away?" Nathan asked sharply. Elias knelt beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, but I'm telling you the truth. You need something we can't provide here." "What's that?" John asked. "Protection," Elias said. "And a place the raiders won't dare to come near." John frowned. "Where?" Elias hesitated. "There's a plantation about a day's walk from here. Large, hidden deep in the old marshlands. The owner, he takes in people. All kinds. But the price," his voice trailed off. "What price?" John pressed. Heron answered quietly. "Service." Ruth looked away. John felt a cold tremor move through him. "You mean slavery?" Elias didn't deny it. "It isn't like the chains you're thinking of," he said carefully. "Not always. Some go willingly for shelter. Some go because they have no choice." John felt the room tilt slightly. He had just escaped death, escaped fire, escaped the river, and now he was being told that safety existed only in the shadow of bondage. What kind of man would run a place like that? He asked. Heron's eyes narrowed. A powerful one. A dangerous one. But also a predictable one. He protects what he claims. No raider will cross his land. Not if they value their own lives. Nathan swallowed hard. Pa, we can't go back to the raiders. John's hands trembled under the table. His children needed protection. Food. Shelter. And if the settlement here was unsafe, then he had to choose a different path. Even one he would never have imagined walking. Can your settlement take us there? John asked quietly. Elias nodded. We can lead you close. After that, you'll need to approach on your own. John looked at his children, exhausted, frightened, fragile. He had failed to protect them once. He would not fail again. Then we'll go, he said. No one spoke for a moment. Then Ruth whispered, as if the words tasted heavy. May God keep you strong. That night, the children slept beside the fire, wrapped in fresh quilts. John remained awake long into the darkness, staring at the wooden beams overhead, listening to their breathing. He thought of Mary. He thought of the flames. He thought of the raiders' laughter echoing through the trees. And he thought of the road ahead, a road leading into the marshlands, into a place where freedom was traded for safety, a place where their lives would change forever. And as the moon climbed above the silent forest, John Turner whispered the same words over and over, a fragile prayer against the shadows. Just stay alive. Please just stay alive. The journey to the marshlands began before dawn, when the sky was still bruised with the last traces of night. The forest settlement moved quietly, as if unwilling to disturb whatever spirits slept between the trees. Elias walked at the front, his stride steady and deliberate, while Ruth and Heron brought up the rear. John and his children stayed in the middle, surrounded by the people who had taken them in, if only for a day. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold earth. Each step sank slightly into the soft ground, the night's dew still clinging to the underbrush. The children walked closer to John than ever, gripping his sleeves or brushing against his side, afraid to drift even a foot away. Elias spoke little as they moved, but when he did, it was only to warn of steep roots or to guide them across a narrow stream. The woods thickened the farther they went, the sunlight slipping between the leaves in narrow, trembling beams. Are we close? Nathan asked quietly after hours of walking. Closer, Elias said. Not close. The path shifted downward, the soil growing darker and wetter. Soon, the trees spread farther apart, replaced by low, tangled brush and pools of still water. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of mud and decay. Insects buzzed lazily above the marsh, and frogs croaked from somewhere deep within the dense reeds. Anna wrinkled her nose. It smells bad. That's the marshlands, Heron said gently. They swallow anything that stays still too long. John placed a hand on her back. We won't stay long. But even as he said the words, he didn't believe them. Elias slowed his pace, scanning the muddy horizon. The marsh stretched endlessly, its surface a patchwork of shallow pools and trembling soil. Strange grasses as tall as a man swayed gently despite the stillness of the air. This is as far as we go, Elias said, stopping at a low rise of dry ground. From here, you follow the ridge until you see the watch posts. Don't step off the ridge. The ground won't hold you. John looked out and saw nothing but darkness and water. Where exactly are we going? The plantation lies beyond that marsh, Heron said, pointing into the distance. A place called Deepwater Landing. Nathan frowned. That doesn't sound like a farm. It isn't, Elias said grimly. It's a kingdom. The man who runs it well, you'll see. John felt a chill crawl down his spine. And this man he'll take us in? If he sees value in you, Ruth answered quietly. He takes everyone, but not everyone stays free. John stiffened. I'm not looking for freedom. I'm looking for safety for my children. Ruth's expression softened. Then you'll do whatever it takes. John nodded, though the words felt heavy and cold in his chest. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. Whatever happens, keep your head down. Don't raise your voice. Don't challenge him. He's not a man to test. What's his name? John asked. Elias hesitated. You'll hear it soon enough. John didn't push for more. Something in Elias' eyes told him the truth was better discovered slowly. Ruth knelt and hugged Anna and Caleb, pressing a soft kiss to each forehead. Be brave, she whispered. Listen to your father. Nathan stiffened when she embraced him, but after a moment, he hugged her back. Heron shook John's hand with firm pressure. You're doing the right thing. John wasn't so sure. Elias pointed toward the ridge. Go, before the raiders track you here. John turned toward the marsh and stepped forward. The ridge was narrow, winding through the marshlands like the spine of some buried creature. Each side fell sharply into mud that rippled and shifted as though something underneath was alive. The children clung to John's clothing, afraid that a wrong step would send them plunging into the muck. The sun slowly climbed higher, turning the marsh into a glistening field of pale reflections. Birds circled overhead, their cries long and piercing. Strange insects darted through the reeds, buzzing with a deep hum that vibrated in the air. Hours passed. Then, at last, Nathan pointed ahead. Pa, look. John lifted his gaze. At the far edge of the marsh, rising from the reeds like dark wooden skeletons, stood tall watch posts, 3 in a row, connected by rope bridges and heavy beams. Atop each post, a man stood with a rifle slung across his chest, scanning the marsh with unwavering eyes. Deepwater Landing. John swallowed hard. Stay behind me. As they approached the posts, one of the guards shouted, Hold where you stand. John lifted his hand slowly. The children pressed behind him. We're seeking shelter, he called. We were told. Quiet. The guard descended the ladder with practiced ease. He was tall and muscular, his skin weathered by long days in the sun. His expression remained unreadable as he approached. He stopped a few feet away, studying them carefully. The bruises, the mud, the soaked clothes. Follow me, he said at last. No warmth. No smile. Only command. The children exchanged nervous glances. John nodded and followed. The guard led them along a narrow wooden walkway raised above the mud. As they moved deeper, the marsh gave way to firmer ground, dark soil packed tightly underfoot. Trees reappeared, though twisted by the wet environment, their branches reaching like crooked arms. Then the land opened into a clearing. John's breath caught. Deepwater Landing was larger than he had imagined, a sprawling estate surrounded by wide fields and dense stands of cypress trees. Dozens of small cabins lined the perimeter, smoke rising from chimneys. In the center stood a grand house, tall and imposing, made of dark timber with deep, slanted roofs. People moved across the grounds, men hauling crates, women hanging laundry, children running between cabins. But there was no laughter, no sound of joy, only quiet work, quiet obedience. The guard motioned for them to wait near a stone well. Then he strode toward the main house and disappeared inside. The children pressed against John. Pa, Anna whispered. I don't like this place. I know, he murmured. Stay close. Minutes later, the guard returned, followed by a man John had not expected. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark vest and white shirt, his boots polished despite the muddy earth. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp and piercing. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned everything within sight. The master, the guard announced. The man approached slowly, his gaze moving from John to each of the children. You survived the marsh, he said, his voice smooth and deep. Not many do. John straightened. We were told you offer protection. I offer many things, the man replied. Protection is one. He walked a slow circle around John, examining him as though assessing a horse for purchase. You're strong, he said, even injured. And your children, they're young, but they'll grow. John felt his jaw tighten. I'm here for safety. Nothing else. The man smiled faintly. Safety has a price. John swallowed. What price? Service, the man said. Work. Loyalty. And if I refuse? The guards shifted subtly, a reminder that refusal was not truly an option. You won't refuse, the master said calmly. Not if you want your children alive. Nathan clenched his fists, but John squeezed his shoulder tightly, warning him not to speak. The master looked pleased. You will be assigned a cabin. You will receive food, water, shelter. He paused. In return, you work my land. You obey my rules. And you stay within the boundaries of Deepwater Landing. John's voice trembled slightly. For how long? The master's smile returned, colder now. For as long as you are useful. The children looked terrified. Anna buried her face against John's side. Caleb held onto Nathan's arm, whispering something too soft to hear. John inhaled slowly. He hated this man. He hated this place. He hated every chain he couldn't yet see but could already feel tightening. But he loved his children more. "We accept," he said. The master nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then you belong to Deepwater now." He motioned for the guard. "Show them their cabin. Work begins at sunrise." The guard gestured for them to follow. John took the children's hands and walked toward the line of cabins, his heart heavy with dread. As they passed through the settlement, people paused to watch. Men and women with hollow eyes, children with quiet steps. They looked at John and his family with a mix of sympathy and resignation, as if silently saying, "You're one of us now." The guard stopped at a small wooden cabin near the far edge of the compound. "This is yours," he said. "Stay inside after dark. Don't wander. Don't talk back. Don't ask for more." John nodded. The guard left without another word. Inside, the cabin was simple: 2 straw mattresses, a small table, a rusted stove, and a bucket of water. It felt more like a cage than a home. Anna sat on the mattress and pulled her knees to her chest. "Pa, when are we leaving?" John knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Someday," he whispered. "Not today." Nathan stood near the doorway, staring at the estate outside. "He's not going to let us go, is he?" "No," John admitted. "But we won't stay forever." Caleb crawled onto John's lap, exhausted. "Pa, I'm scared." John kissed the top of his head. "I know," he murmured. "But you're safe tonight. That's what matters." As the sun began to set beyond the trees, Deepwater Landing sank into a heavy stillness. The fields darkened. Lamps flickered to life in the cabins. Distant voices murmured like ghosts drifting through the dusk. Inside their small cabin, John held his children close. The walls felt thin. The shadows felt deep. The night felt endless. But as he watched the faint glow of the moon rise through the small window, he whispered to himself, and perhaps to the universe, "This is not the end. This is only the dark before dawn." And dawn, no matter how distant, would come, one way or another. The first weeks at Deepwater Landing passed like a long, suffocating dream. Every morning before the sun broke through the fog, the guards marched through the workers' cabins, banging metal rods against the doors. The sound rattled through the settlement like thunder. John rose each day before the children woke, ready to catch their frightened breaths before the banging began. He wanted to shield them from everything: the noise, the fear, the humiliation, but the plantation swallowed every kindness as quickly as it swallowed every hope. He worked the fields alongside men who no longer remembered what freedom tasted like. They plowed, chopped, dug, carried, moving with a quiet, broken rhythm that came from years of surrender. The land was unforgiving. Half bog, half hard clay, its air wet with rot and dust. John's hands blistered until they bled. His ribs still ached from the river. But he never complained. Complaints were punished. Nathan was assigned to lighter work, sorting grain, carrying water, moving small tools between the barns. He tried to stay strong, but John saw the old spark in his son fade, little by little. Anna and Caleb spent their days in the children's quarters, watched over by older women who whispered lullabies so quietly it sounded like the marsh humming. Every night, after the work bell rang and the fields emptied, John gathered the children inside their cabin. They talked in hushed voices, sharing scraps of bread, small memories, dreams they were afraid to say too loudly. "Pa," Caleb whispered one night, lying with his head on John's leg. Are we going to live here forever?" John brushed a hand through his hair. "No," he said softly. "We'll leave. I promise." "When?" Anna asked, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the oil lamp. "When the time is right." But the right time felt impossibly far away. The master's shadow ruled everything at Deepwater Landing. He patrolled the grounds often, riding a tall black horse with an unnatural stillness in his posture, surveying his domain with cold precision. Workers stiffened whenever he approached, their eyes lowered, their voices fading into silence. John avoided him as much as possible, but the master seemed to notice him anyway. Perhaps it was because John had survived what so many others had not. Perhaps it was because he resisted bending fully to the plantation's quiet chokehold. Or perhaps it was simply because the master knew strength when he saw it, and strength was something he could use. One afternoon, as John carried bags of grain toward the barn, he heard the sound of hooves behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Turner." John stopped, tightening his grip on the grain sack, then faced the master. "Yes, sir. You work hard," the master said, his gaze steady and emotionless. "Harder than most. Survival requires it," John replied carefully. The master smiled faintly. "You'll last here. Your children, too, if they follow your lead." John bit back the words he wanted to say. "You understand the rules now," the master continued. "And if you keep understanding, you'll live long enough to see them grow." John forced himself to nod. "Yes, sir." The master turned his horse, dismissing him with a flick of his reins. John stood still for several moments after he left, staring at the ground, as if the earth itself held the answer to everything he wished he could do. But it didn't. Not yet. Despite the harshness of Deepwater Landing, not everyone there was cruel. Some of the workers, especially the older ones, watched John and his children with quiet empathy. They were careful, speaking only when the guards were far enough not to hear. Their voices held stories, warnings, and sometimes tiny sparks of hope. One night, an old man named Lyle knocked softly at John's door. "I need a word," he whispered. John stepped outside with him, closing the door gently so the children would not wake. Lyle's face was etched with years of sun and hardship. "You're new," he said, "and you're already thinking about running. I can see it in your eyes." John stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Lyle said. "Every man who comes here thinks about leaving. Some even try." His eyes grew darker. "None succeed." John felt the weight of the statement, but he did not look away. "That doesn't mean we want." Lyle studied him for a moment, then sighed. "If you're going to try, you'll need to know something important." "Which is?" Lyle stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "Deepwater Landing isn't just surrounded by marsh. It's surrounded by water channels carved by the master. If you walk the wrong way, you'll sink. If you walk the right way, you still have to cross the river." John felt his pulse quicken. "The river, can it be crossed?" Lyle's eyes softened. "Once a year," he said, "when the tide draws out and the mud hardens. There's a window. A small one." "When?" "In 2 weeks." John swallowed. 2 weeks. 14 days. 200 hours. Lyle continued. "People watch the river from the cabins. When the water drops low enough, a path appears through the reeds. You walk fast, you walk light, and you don't look back." John inhaled slowly. "Has anyone made it?" Lyle looked away. "Not yet. But we will," John said quietly, more to himself than to Lyle. Lyle placed a hand on his shoulder. "If anyone can, you can. Just keep your children close. The marsh takes what you don't hold." And then he slipped back into the shadows. John stared into the darkness for a long time, until the distant croaking of frogs pulled him back inside. That night, he didn't sleep. He watched his children huddled in their small beds, watched the moon drift across the sky, watched the hours slip like sand through his fingers. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to gather strength. 2 weeks to find a way. 2 weeks to survive. The days crawled forward with a quiet tension that only John seemed to feel. He watched the river whenever he could, during breaks, at dawn, at dusk. Each time, he studied the water's edge, marking where the reeds bent and where the mud seemed firmer. The children sensed something was changing too. "Pa," Nathan whispered one evening as they washed their faces near the well. "You're acting different." John wiped the water from his brow. "I just want us safe." "You mean to leave?" John met his son's eyes. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Nathan breathed slowly. "Then I'm ready." John placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're strong, boy. Stronger than you know." Nathan nodded, his jaw setting with quiet determination. Anna and Caleb sensed it too. They didn't know where they were going, but they trusted John completely, and that trust gave him the strength he needed. 2 weeks passed like a slow storm, and then the night came. It was just past midnight when John felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a quiet absence of the usual marsh sounds, as if the land was holding its breath. He rose from the bed, stepped quietly to the window, and looked out. The river water had dropped. Visible, bare, revealing a trembling, fragile stretch of mud and reed that had been hidden beneath the tide. The path. John turned to the children and shook them gently awake. "It's time," he whispered. Nathan sat up instantly. Anna blinked sleepily. Caleb rubbed his eyes. "Are we leaving now?" Anna whispered. "Yes," John said. "Right now. Stay quiet. Stay close." They gathered the few belongings they had: a blanket, a small loaf of bread, a cracked cup for water. Nothing more. Anything else would slow them down. John opened the cabin door. The night was thick with mist, the moon a pale ghost behind drifting clouds. The workers' cabins stood in silent rows, each window dark. The guards at the watch posts leaned lazily against the beams, half asleep. The marsh waited. John took Caleb's hand, then Anna's. Nathan walked beside him, tall despite his fear. Step by careful step, they made their way toward the ridge that led into the marsh. John's heart hammered so loudly he feared the guards would hear it. But the night swallowed their footsteps, their breathing, their existence. When they reached the marsh's edge, John paused. The path stretched before them, narrow, trembling, slick with mud. It curved between tall grasses like a shadowed thread leading into darkness. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Don't step off the path. Not even 1 inch." The children nodded. They stepped forward. The mud sucked lightly at their feet, but it held. John moved slowly, his breath tight, his muscles coiled. The sound of frogs echoed softly across the marsh. Reeds brushed against their sides. A cold wind drifted past them, shaking the tall grasses like warning fingers. Halfway across, Anna stumbled. John caught her instantly, pulling her upright. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're doing fine." They continued. Then a noise. A distant shout. A lantern flared somewhere behind them. Pa, Nathan whispered. "They know." John didn't look back. "Keep going." The shout grew louder. More voices joined. Footsteps pounded on the wooden planks near the marsh. "Faster," John whispered. "Don't run, but faster." The children quickened their steps, keeping their feet on the narrow line of firmer mud. The marsh water rippled beside them as if stirred by hidden things. The shouts grew harsher. "Closer." "Pa!" Caleb cried as a rifle cracked behind them. John felt the bullet slam into the mud beside his foot. "Run," he whispered now. "Run." They surged forward, their feet slipping, their breath sharp. John scooped Caleb into his arms and pushed ahead with frantic strength. The end of the marsh came into view, solid ground rising beyond the reeds like a dark salvation. "Keep going," John shouted. Nathan reached the solid land first. He turned and reached for Anna, pulling her up. John stumbled onto the ground next, dropping to his knees with Caleb still in his arms. Behind them, the guards reached the marsh path, but it was too late. The tide had shifted again, the water beginning to rise, swallowing the path inch by inch. No one could cross now. No one could follow. John collapsed onto the firm earth, holding the children close, their breaths mingling in frantic, trembling gasps. The guards' shouts faded behind them. The marsh swallowed the last trace of the path. They were free. Not safe, not yet, but free. Nathan looked at John with wide, shining eyes. "Pa, we made it." John pulled all 3 children into his arms. "Yes," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We made it." Above them, the sky began to brighten. The first pale light of dawn spilled over the horizon, touching the marsh with gold, igniting the world with the soft glow of morning. And as the sun climbed higher, John felt something inside him shift. Not relief, not pride, but something deeper. Hope. A fragile, trembling, defiant hope. They walked toward the rising light together, leaving the marshlands behind, leaving Deepwater Landing behind, leaving the nightmares behind. And as the sun warmed their faces, John whispered the words that had carried him through darkness, fire, river, chains, and fear. "This is our dawn, and we're not waiting anymore."